Mustard. You find it on hot dogs, you find it on hamburgers, and you might just find it on the Imperial Guardsmen of the Armageddon Steel Legion. So why don't we travel down this food flavoured episode and have a look at how we actually paint a retro Guardsman from the Armageddon Steel Legion. Let's go down there now. So here we are, we've got our Armageddon Steel Legion miniature here. This one's got a grenade launcher, so he's actually part of my command squad. I've primed him with Chaos Black Spray, and now what we're going to do is come in with 2 coats of Mournfang Brown, and we're going to apply that all over that trench coat, making sure we also hit the under edges of it, just so that it's not leaving sort of black in the recess or anything like that. It gives it a little bit of colour. With our 2 coats of our Mournfang Brown now applied and dried, we can actually mix up a 50-50 mix of Mournfang Brown and Baylor Brown to start introducing that mustard colour. What we're going to do here, we're going to apply this liberally as a layer. We're going to leave the Mournfang Brown in the deepest recesses. Maybe it's, the joint at the front of the trench coat, maybe it's down the sleeves, they've got a few thick seamy like joins. We'll leave that in those deepest recesses and pretty well apply this everywhere else. So with that now done, you can see that this model is starting to move towards the mustard colour. It's still a bit patchy, but that's okay for this next step. What we're going to do, we're going to grab some pure Baylor Brown and we're going to start layering this on. We're going to leave a little bit of that 50-50 mix just coming out from the deepest points a bit. We're going to choose some of the next deepest points of the model. Maybe it's some deep creases in the trench coat, maybe it's down the sleeves of the arms, things like that. And we're going to leave that just in those next deepest points. We're going to work that Baylor Brown everywhere else, much like a normal layer coat now. So with that now done, you can see that this mustard colour is really starting to come along. And it's starting to look so much like the iconic 3rd edition version of this paint scheme. But what we're going to do now, we're going to move on from our layering and actually start highlighting. So grab some Ushabti bone and we're going to mix that in 50-50 with our Baylor Brown. Just start highlighting all over this model as you normally would here. So with that now done, we can start moving on to our next step, which is to grab some pure Ushabti bone, and we're just going to pick out sort of the brightest areas of our highlights. So that would be our upturned surfaces, maybe it's the sharpest points of detail, some focal points, just things along that nature. So here I've done sort of the tops of that upturned arm. I've sort of focused around the collar at the back of the neck as well, and just done a few other details here and there just to really emphasize the light hitting the sharpest folds of this piece of material. These are so iconic, these trench coats, so getting them right is vital to painting this scheme. As you can see, we've kept that sort of retro classic look, but really packed a punch with the modern paints available. We're going to jump ahead now and start looking at the rest of the fabric on the model, and then we can move on towards completion. Now you're probably looking for other sections of fabric on this model, and we're going to do them now. And that is the trousers. You only see a little bit, so just grab a little bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey and very carefully just paint it in there above the top of the boots and below that trench coat. Being such a small area of the model, it is hard to see these trousers. But what we're going to do, we're going to grab some Dawnstone now, and there's just a couple of little folds that really stand out in them. We'll just give them a quick highlight now, just to give it a little bit of tonal variation. Once that's done, we can call the trousers complete and move on to the next colour. So we have to actually create a bit of a colour like this now. And this is done with a mix of Abaddon black and Elysian green. Start off mixing it 50-50 and then just add a touch more black as you need to get it down to the right depth. It's sort of an in-betweener ratio. It's not quite 2-to-1, but it's also not 1-to-1. It's sort of in between there. We're going to use this for the helmet. Now, if you're using the classic metal miniatures like I have here, you only really have to worry about the helmet. But maybe you're using the new Death Korps of Kreig models. Well, this is actually ideal for the armor plating around the shoulders as well. So get that one on now, and we'll let it dry and move on to the next step. Because we already used Abaddon black in our previous layer, we'll just grab some of it here and just start applying it to all of these grenade rounds that are hanging off the side of the webbing belt. So go ahead and do that now, and we'll move on to the next step. So now what we could do, we can grab some pure Nurgling green, and we're just going to highlight this helmet. Now, as before, if you've done some armor in this colour, you can highlight that in this step as well. But for me, I just have the rim of the helmet, keeping it simple right here. So here I'm grabbing out some Rhinox hide, and we're going to use this to cover all of our sort of leatherish areas. So in this case, we've got the face mask. We've got the webbing belts as well that sort of come up over the shoulders, down the middle of the back and around the hips area. We can also use this on the gloves and the boots. So go ahead and apply that nice and evenly now to those areas. We'll let it dry and come back in and start moving on to the next step. So with that base coat now applied, we're actually going to skip the layering step and go straight into a highlight. Now originally this was straight up into bleach bone, an old colour that no longer exists. So what we're going to do, we're going to grab some Ushabti bone, which is the new replacement. We're actually going to take it a step back and mix that with some of our Rhinox hide in a 50-50 ratio, and then start highlighting all of those leather, belt, face mask, boots, glove areas on our model. So let's go ahead and do that now, and we'll move forward to the next step. These details are starting to get a lot finer, and I want a little bit more control, so I've grabbed my painting handle. And now what I'm going to do is bring in some pure Ushabti bone and give just a very sparing highlight to some of the highest points of that leather stuff. I only really want this on sort of the most solid, most sharp, most light source facing surfaces. So I'm being very, very sparing with this and just hitting a few of those areas to give that emphasis of that extra little highlight. Once this is done, this actually completes the leather, and we can completely move on to the next colour. So with that now done, we can actually move on to our metal. Here we're going to focus on the gun, the belt. There's a couple of joins on the back of the webbing, the lid and the handle on the canteen cup on his belt. We're going to coat all this up with some lead belcher, and we're going to keep it very, very simple by only putting one coat on. We'll try and get it as even as we can, but it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to do it later on with something else that's going to really bring it back. So let's get that on and move to the next step. With that now done, we can bring in our wash palette and some pure Nuln oil wash. Now I have mixed this up just a little bit, about a 2-part wash, 1-part water ratio. And we're just going to wash over all of those areas where we applied our metals. So let's go ahead and do that now. Focus mainly on those recesses. Don't worry too much about the whole sort of surface. Just give it all a quick wash. Make sure it settles nicely in those recesses and it doesn't pull. And we can let it dry and move on to the next step. So what we're going to do now, we're going to shift focus quickly, and we're going to grab some Mournfang Brown and some Mechanicus Standard Grey and mix them together in a 1-to-1 ratio and quickly just base coat all the rough texture around the edge of our base. So while that other layer is still wet around the edge, we're going to mix up roughly 2 or 3 parts of Abaddon Black with Mechanicus Standard Grey for our asphalt. This is going to be up to you on how bright or how deep you want your asphalt, but just paint that on the surface of all the cork that we've left there now. So again, while the other coats on our base are still wet, we can grab some Mournfang Brown and just pick out any of those details that we've added to the base. In my case, I've added some flooring, some I-beams or H-beams from Plasticard, just other little things like that. We can pick that out now and set our rust up. So by doing this, it's actually allowed plenty of time for that non-oil wash to dry. And what we can do, we can grab some pure Ironbreaker now and start layering all of our metals. So the reason I'm going so bright, Armageddon produce a lot of their own weapons on the planet, especially when it comes to lasguns and chimeras, funnily enough. So keeping in that theme, I want to keep my metals quite bright. It's fun. It allows you to paint something different than always painting that grim, dark aesthetic. So let's give this one a crack and paint some brighter metals this time. So with that now done, we can grab some Stormhost Silver, and we're going to highlight all of our metal with that Stormhost Silver. We want to sort of focus more on the upper facing parts and just sort of work it and wrap it around, and that'll just help us blend those highlights out and make them look a little bit more natural than highlighting every single edge that's actually there. It also helps to save a lot of time, especially when the metal is so bright. These aren't the easiest to pick out, but they are there when you really look. While this model's very heavy on silvers, it's not very heavy on the gold metals, but there are some. We'll grab some Balthazar gold and we'll actually start painting up the firing caps on the tops of these grenades that are hanging off the belt. We've got our Balthazar gold out and we've still got our Stormhost silver out as well. So let's just lighten up that Balthazar gold a bit with the Stormhost silver, and we'll just give these firing caps a quick rough highlight. These aren't a focal point of the model, but they are an upwards facing point, so they will be something you will see, but your eye's going to be drawn elsewhere. So just make it a quick rough one on these. So now we're going to grab some pure Abaddon Black. We're not going to highlight or wash this part, but there is a hose that comes out the front of the mask on the face. So let's just hit that in now, and while we've got this out, if we've made any errors on the grenades, we can also touch up that black. So we'll just coat that up now. That'll be it for this part of the model, and we can move on to the next colour. So grab yourself some paper towel and a good brush for stippling, and we're going to grab some Scrag Brown and just go straight in over those rusty areas on the base. So while we've got our stippling brush out, we'll grab some Troll Slayer Orange and we'll do exactly the same thing. We won't wash the brush out, we'll just go straight in and stipple over the top, just in a finer sort of pattern. I now want to create the effect where that paint that's maybe been on that surface for a long while has chipped or flaked away, which has allowed that rust to come in and sort of take effect. So grab some Rakarth flesh for this, and we're just going to sparingly stipple over the top of that rust just to create the illusion like at one point in time, this flooring tile was actually painted. So I've brought my wash palette back in and I've brought out some pure Agrax Earthshade. I haven't watered this down, I haven't mixed it with anything, and I'm going to apply this liberally all over that base just to really put some depth into this. While the Agrax Earthshade is still drying on the base, I've actually gone and grabbed some Abaddon Black and Cantor Blue. I've actually mixed this one up in roughly a 2-to-1, 1-to-1 ratio, somewhere around that region, because these goggles are supposed to be very dark. And I'm going to use that to apply it all over the surface of the goggles. Keeping with those goggles now, I've actually grabbed some pure Cantor Blue, and I'm going to sort of start highlighting, blending out the darkness of this colour more towards the right hand side. So grab that now, sort of apply it a bit like a layer, but only come 2/3 of the way across the length of the goggles. We're going to switch it up a bit here, but this allows us to sort of focus on two areas at the same time. So grab some Ulthuan Grey, and we're going to use this to paint in all of that regiment marking on the left hand shoulder. Gives it that real white appearance. We can then grab our Ulthuan Grey and mix it in with some Cantor Blue just to really start giving this a highlight on the lens. Don't forget to give it a bit of a reflection dot on the other side as well, just to make it look like it is glass. Grab your pure Ulthuan Grey again, and we're just going to put that in the top right corner of these goggles. Just a little dot, just so it really emphasises that this is a glass surface. But it also allows us to keep the overall tone of it dull, rather than going up to the stark brightness of a white. Here I've grabbed some white scar, and what we're going to do, we're going to just highlight around the edge of that regiment marking. It's only a small circle area, so you don't need much of this out, and just go ahead and do that now. So here I've actually grabbed some Evil Sun Scarlet to paint in the lightning bolt that forms part of the regimental logo. So grab that now. I've done it at about a 60-40 paint to water ratio, and just be very careful with a very fine tip on a good brush, because this is not very well embellished. It's only just a very minor step up from the overall regimental patch. So just carefully get this one in now, take your time. I've grabbed a little bit of Wild Rider Red here, and all I'm going to do is just go down one side of the top and bottom of the lightning bolt here, just to create a little bit of a highlight. It's a tiny area, you're not really going to notice it, but it just steps that painting level up a little bit more. And so our model itself is now finished, but we've still got to finish this base. We're going to grab some Mechanicus Standard Grey here and just lightly dry brush over all that asphalt surface, just to really pick up the details that are actually in that cork texture. I've grabbed some Skaven Blight Dinge now, and what we're going to do is dry brush all over that rougher texture that we started off on our base. So do that now. Make sure you pick up the edges of the top of the base as well, just so it sort of blends it in together nicely. Where you can, avoid some of the other colours you've put down, but we just want to have them blend at the end of the day. Without washing our brush out again, we can go straight into some Storm Vermin Fur now. And we're going to dry brush all those areas, but we're going to go a little bit lighter and pick up more of the higher details. What we're going to do now, we're going to grab some Karak Stone, and we're going to use this to actually tie all the colours on our base back together and make it look like it's more natural and meant to be. We're going to go super light on this, even if it means you can barely see it until you pass it 2 or 3 times. That's ideal. This is just to tie these surfaces in and really pick out the sharp points. That's all. With that now done, we can actually remove the model from the holder. And we're going to just paint in the rim of the base. You can use whatever colour you want here. Maybe one of the colours we've already used on our base. I personally like a black rim. It just neatens it up and frames it nicely. So we've only used 2 washes on very minimal areas of the model. And as you can see, the results look great. So there you have it. That is the retro original way of painting the Armageddon Steel Legion with their mustard trench coats. Few key things here, not a lot of washes. Because it's a traditional classic retro scheme, washes weren't a big thing then. We used to use inks, and they used to be used for a totally different purpose to what our shades and washes are now. So the less you can use washes on these retro styles, the better and closer they become. I've done the hard work and I've converted the old colour names to the new colour names. They're slightly off. It does take things like doing those half steps and maybe mixing a couple of those slightly higher tones or slightly darker tones together to create the right look. But you will get there with a little bit of experimentation. I'm actually going to post the image and the link on my Facebook and Instagram to where you can find the old to new color conversion chart. It's ideal, especially if you've got old codexes or you hunt down old codexes and go, oh, blood red, red gore, scab red. Yeah, we don't have those colors. At least you can look them up on this website, in this image, whatever way it is that you find it, and you can convert it over to what the new colors are. Just makes life a lot easier than just pulling out all your paints and trying to experiment and get it right. But that's it for this week, guys. This has been a bit of a passion project of mine for a while, and funnily enough, this is actually the first Steel Legion model I've painted in full since starting this project. And I'm glad I could have you guys along for that journey. So thanks for sticking around with us through this one, through all these weird things that are going on in this episode. We've managed to get through to the end, and we will see you all next week, where we're going to have something, again, there's going to be a lot of fun to work on. Till then, have a good one, guys.